The floor of the Sunken Arena drank me down to nothing, and then it gave me back. I had already finished dying. I want that on the record. The death blast had crested over my sternum. My HP bar had emptied to a thin red rind, and somewhere above the cheap seats, a referee was raising the flag that turned a man into a settled claim. My skin was leather. My teeth were loose in their sockets, each one a tenant about to be evicted by the heat. I felt the specific clerical click of a body filing its own closure, and then the universe hiccuped, like a clerk who has stamped the wrong line and licks his thumb to undo it. 1 second. The world reeled it back exactly 1 second, no refund of dignity included. My eyes opened on the ceiling I knew by heart, the lava vault's underbelly, ribbed with cooling pipes that never cooled, sweating orange light onto 40,000 paying witnesses. The blast had not landed yet. It hung above me as potential, a fist of compressed mana the size of a delivery van, drawn back in the caster's palm and grinning. I had a full second to admire it. I spent the second looking left instead. Vance stood at the rail of the command box, and Vance was smiling. Not a cruel smile. That was the part that had always undone me, the warmth of it, the genuine crinkle at the corners, the smile of a man who has signed something terrible and feels relieved the paperwork is behind him. He lifted 2 fingers off the brass railing, a small wave, the same gesture he used to flag a waiter, to wish me luck, to mark inventory as expended. He had put his name on my death certificate so the guild could collect the payout, and he had done it the way you tip a hat. So I smiled back. I want it understood that smiling cost me nothing. Smiling, in fact, was the first thing in years I could afford. The blast detonated. It came down as a column of white that turned the arena sand to glass and the air to a flat hand pressed against every inch of me at once. By every rule I had ever been rented under, this was the line where the contract terminated and the body became a liability for someone in legal to depreciate. I braced for the red rind to vanish. It didn't move. My HP bar sat full, serene. A green so steady it looked smug, holding its line while the fire stripped the skin off my forearm in a long, curling ribbon, while my eyebrows went and the lashes after them, while the soles of my boots fused to the glass and the glass fused to me. The pain arrived on schedule, every nerve invoicing at once, 1,000 small screaming entries demanding to be paid. The pain was real. I felt all of it. It just wasn't mine to settle. A window opened across my vision, no class panel, no fanfare, no golden trumpet announcing I had leveled up into something worth fearing. Just a rectangle of cold green text, the color of an exit sign in a building nobody plans to leave. 3 words at the top, set in a font that had never once been excited about anything. Black Ledger. Beneath it, the columns assembled themselves with the unbothered patience of a spreadsheet loading on bad signal. Damage absorbed. Account debited. Exchange rate of grievance. And the number. My number. The agony presently roasting my forearm down to the white architecture of bone did not deduct from me. It transferred. I watched the figure leave my body, the way money leaves a checking account, cleanly, instantly, with a small green confirmation that asked for no consent and offered no apology. Debit posted. Account Vance_K. Across the arena, in the command box, behind the brass rail, my friend the team leader folded. He folded over the railing the way wet cardboard folds, his 2 waving fingers snapping shut into a fist that clutched at ribs no fire had touched. His mouth opened. No sound made it out that I could hear over the roar, but I have done enough screaming on these sands to read the shape of it. He was asking a question, and the question was why, and there was no clerk in the universe positioned to answer him. The heat boiled the marrow in my arm. 40,000 witnesses watched me cook and not die, and the ledger noticed them, every one, and adjusted. Exchange rate, times 1.0 to times 3.7. Witness premium applied. The multiplier climbed while the crowd's noise climbed with it, the two of them feeding each other, and Vance's account took the whole revised invoice in one swallow. I lay there in my own ruin and did the only thing my situation permitted. I read the statement. Damage in, total. Damage retained, 0. Net change to my position? An open account, 1 debtor, named, sorted, accruing. The fire guttered out somewhere above me, its mana spent, its job by every metric complete. And I was still on the floor, still breathing through a throat the color of charcoal, still solvent in the one currency that mattered. The referee's flag came down anyway. He could not see the green window. To him, to the medics jogging out with their stretcher and their clipboard, to the actuary upstairs already keying my expiration into a field, I was exactly what the certificate said I was. Expended, liquidated, closed. Dead on paper. That was the revelation, and it arrived without ceremony, the way the worst true things always do. They had filed me. The system had paid out. As far as every guild ledger in this rotting city was concerned, Kai no longer existed to collect a debt, which meant Kai was finally, perfectly, free to do nothing else. I stopped being a tank on that floor. I became the bill. The morgue cuff wouldn't close around my wrist. It searched, found a settled claim, and sprang open with a small apologetic chime. A dead man owes no copay, accrues no liability, files no grievance, and the gurney simply stopped being my problem. I stood up off it. No one on that floor had the standing to detain a closed account. That is the clause they leave out of the prospectus. The cheapest unit on the floor is worth more dead than alive, but only to itself. The tower climbed the way rot climbs drywall, floor over swallowed floor, each guild corporation built on the carcass of the one it had digested, every tier washed in the cold blue of scanners reading bodies in and out by the tag in the wrist. Down below the arena, in the wet dark, consumables like me farmed mana cores out of things with too many legs. Up top, men with clean cuffs priced us by the quarter. They called it a city. It metabolized like a dungeon. I rode the lift 40 floors and watched the scanner over the doors hunt for me. It found nothing. The little blue eye passed across my chest, looked for a living tag, read a death certificate notarized and paid, and logged the car empty. 40 floors of the most surveilled real estate in the world, and I went up through it like a draft under a door. Somewhere there were 2 of me now, the one filed and paid, the one holding the breath, and not even the building could tell which was the counterfeit. The 7th-tier lobby smelled of cold espresso and toner, that specific perfume of a place where the killing gets done by signature. A wall of glass tickers ran floor to ceiling, raiders quoted in green and red like livestock, A-list contracts up an 1/8, F-list consumables holding flat at a price you'd mistake for a rounding error. My old line still scrolled. K, deceased, claim settled. They hadn't even pulled it. A dead man kept trading, apparently, as a fond memory of liquidity. Vance waited by the reception desk with 2 functioning ribs and a smile he'd clearly rehearsed. He looked well for a man who'd taken a column of arena fire on an account he hadn't known he carried. Pressed collar, a healer's brace shadowing the jacket, the faint gray of someone whose marrow remembered a heat his skin never met. He saw me. The smile stuttered at the corner, the flicker of a balance when a charge you don't recognize clears, then reassembled, because Vance had always been able to sell a thing he didn't own. Kai. He said my name like a question he prayed I'd answer no to. The floor said, "They told me you were..." "Clerical," I said. "You know how the paperwork gets." Behind him, through smoked glass, 7 chairs lined a long pale table on a raised floor, and in them sat the people who set the quota. The council. 7 seats over the whole rotting tower, and one of those 7 signed a number every year that told the lower floors how many of us to spend. Vance was their hand at street level. The signatory, not the architect, the pen, not the quota. And he had put his name precisely where the architecture told him to. They were all smiling. Smiling is free up there. Somebody downstairs always covers the wince. A woman at the head of the table raised 2 fingers. The same gesture the whole building seemed to share. The flag for a waiter. The mark for inventory expended. And a clerk slid a fresh contract across the counter with a pen laid neat along its spine. F-list consumable. Standard terms. The identical leash they'd hung me on the first time. The one that ended on the Sunken Arena's glass. I read all 6 pages. I read them all now. Hazard waiver, liquidation clause, the tidy subsection where my body became a tradable futures position the instant ink touched fiber, rentable by the day, written down by the quarter, insurable against my own death to the benefit of the house. Every line a door, every initial a key cut for another man's hand. The horror of the document wasn't that it was monstrous, it was that it was correct, notarized, compliant, a machine that ate men with the unhurried appetite of compound interest. I picked up the pen. A living man signs that and becomes a victim. A dead man signs it and becomes a thing the actuarial tables have no column for. A creditor already paid out, strolling back in to take on debt he can rout. The black ledger doesn't care that the page calls me an asset. It needs one thing only: proximity to the debtors, close enough to post. So I signed. Steady hand, clean line, Kai in full, the K not so much as trembling. Vance watched the ink dry and let his shoulders down half an inch, reading the signature as the old surrender, the consumable folding itself back into the consumables slot, because where else does the meat go? The 7 smiles widened a synchronized degree. 2 floors down, in a rack of humming servers, a field flipped from closed to asset, active, and the leash clicked shut around my throat. I had just bought 30 inches of slack on every one of theirs. "Glad to have you back on the books," Vance said, and clapped my shoulder, square over the forearm still weeping under its gauze, the one his account had settled in full at 3.7 times face. I didn't flinch. That wince had already been invoiced. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "I hear there's an opening this quarter." The roster had me penciled in as the first casualty. The boss concurred. It hauled itself out of the Tier 3 pit on legs of welded I-beam, a thing the bestiary filed as a slag warden. 9 feet of kiln-fired clay with a maul where its right arm should hang. The head a knot of fused rebar the size of a filing cabinet. They'd posted me at the point because bait wears the front rank and a man already written off makes excellent caulk for the gap where the damage comes in. I set the shield. I waited to be appointed. 6 raiders on my team, and not one could tell the meat shield from the man wearing its face. The maul came down on a stroke meant to fold a novice into the floorboards. It caved my guard the way a foreclosure caves a door. No malice in it, only leverage and follow-through. The rim drove into my sternum. Something in my forearm, the one still healing from arena fire, went the bright white of a bone deciding whether to stay one piece. 8,000 gallery seats inhaled at once. A woman at the rail covered her child's eyes. The healers 2 ranks back flinched toward me on reflex, already triaging a corpse they could see in their heads. My bar held full. Green. The pain arrived on schedule, got time-stamped, and went looking for its proper cost center. Across the bottom of my vision, the black ledger unrolled its tidy columns and did the only thing it knows how to do. It found the account that profited from renting me to this pit, and it posted. Debit. Account MOLL_T. Vitality, 1 block. Witnesses, 8,200. Exchange rate of grievance, times 2.3. Balance due, accruing. That number is my rank. Nobody else can read it. While the floor watched an F-list meat shield swallow a blow that should have ended him and stay inconveniently vertical, the only stat that mattered glowed where I alone could see it. A multiplier, not a level, the going rate at which the world converts my suffering into someone else's loss. A modest house tonight. The rate would have tripled in the Sunken Arena's 40,000-seat throat. And I filed that the way you note a property you intend, eventually, to buy. 4 floors up and half the city over, in an office that smelled of laminate and expensive coffee, the treasurer's nose let go. I didn't see it. I didn't have to. The ledger is a double-entry instrument. Nothing leaves my column without arriving in hers. And a pledged block of vitality does not evaporate quietly from a body that signed it over as a bond. Moll would be pressing a monogrammed handkerchief to her face right about now, watching it bloom red as a stamp leaned on too hard, telling herself it was the dry air, the long quarter, the stress of a portfolio that kept shedding weight no audit could locate. Her ledger and mine were the same page read from opposite sides. She'd authored the lien. She simply never checked which direction the blood would run. The slag warden wound up for a second swing. I let the shield hang loose and stumbled, sold the stagger, sold the open-mouthed gasp, the harmless novice rediscovering his feet a half-beat slow. Crowds adore a man who nearly dies and declines to. Loud relief makes excellent cover. While they roared, I leaned into the next blow instead of away, took the rebar head flush across the shoulder, and felt nothing but the dull register of impact and the small, clean click of another line filing itself where it belonged. Debit. Account MOL_T. Vitality, 1 block. Rate times 2.4. The multiplier ticked. Eyes had drifted to the lucky liability, and grievance is priced on attention. A near corpse that keeps standing draws a gallery, and a gallery moves the rate. My teammates screamed build orders I ignored. The damage dealers chipped the construct's clay flank to slag. The healer behind me burned a fortune in mana, pouring closes into a man whose bar never so much as twitched, and not one of them grasped they were watching a withdrawal dressed up as a fight. I am not a tank. I am a teller window. The construct's knee buckled under focused fire. It dropped its guard, dropped its maul, and I stepped inside the death throw. A final flailing arc that would have decapitated the man on paper I'm still pretending to be, and stood in the wreckage as it crumbled into kiln shards around my boots, my bar flat and unbroken, my forearm screaming a sum that was never mine to settle. Victory. Sanctioned clear. The flag fell. The house came up out of its seats for the F-lister who'd somehow outlived his own odds, and I gave them the dazed grin of a man astonished by his own pulse. Pure liability theater, free of charge, because somebody else covers the wince. They always have, I'd only finally learned where to mail the bill. Then the ledger did something it had never done in front of me. Beneath Mall's swelling debit, under the running multiplier and the cheerful accruing, a new line wrote itself into a column I hadn't known the instrument kept. Interest due, Chi. Banked principal unsettled. Carrying cost times 1.1 and rising. The pain I'd refused to spend wasn't sitting in some vault at zero cost, waiting politely on my pleasure. It was a loan I had taken against myself. Every blow I swallowed and declined to call, every wound I banked instead of cashing, accrued against my own account at a rate that climbed the longer I held the position. Because the black ledger is not a weapon, it is a contract. A contract has two parties, and both of them get billed. I'd thought I was the bank. The footnote corrected me. I was the collateral. The pit medic pressed a closing rune to my forearm and watched the spell slide off the wound like a coin off wet glass. She tried again, burned a second charge, a third, each one guttering against skin that had decided, somewhere on the arena floor, that it was no longer in the repair business. My bar sat full and green and lying. The flesh beneath it stayed open to the bone, weeping the slow, honest red of a thing that cannot be mended, only outweighted. "You're showing full vitality," she said, an accusation, not a comfort. I heal slow. Politest available synonym for never. She left to invoice somebody. I stayed because a man who can't be repaired owns exactly one research instrument, and it was already open on my arm. I bled and I read. 9 days, run like an audit. I'd take a measured cut, a sparring nick, a deliberate graze along a rusted pit rail, and hold it different ways to see where the money went. The findings posted clean. Cry out, flinch, name the hurt aloud, and the wound behaved like anyone's. It cost me blood and went nowhere. Swallow it, eat the pain in full silence, refuse it the dignity of a sound, and the ledger woke, found a debtor, and posted the charge. Silence was the routing number. Noise voided the transfer. Then the sorting logic, which was neither random nor fair. The first transfers all struck the same two accounts before touching anyone else. Vanchek caught the deepest cuts. Moltis caught the next. Only when their columns saturated did the overflow trickle to lesser names. The instrument ranked my betrayers by how far the knife had gone in, and paid out in that order. Senior creditors first. Grief has a waterfall structure. Who knew? The last variable was the cruelest and the most useful. Witnesses. A graze taken alone in a storage corridor moved a few coppers of someone's vitality and barely twitched the rate. The identical graze taken on a crowded floor under 1,000 strangers posted at a multiple, the figure feeding on every pair of eyes that watched me suffer and stay standing. Public humiliation carried a premium I couldn't have engineered if I'd designed the thing. Shame compounded. The market priced my degradation higher than my pain. I wrote all of it on the inside of my skull, in a hand no auditor would ever subpoena. 6 found me on the 11th day. He was a healer the way a dried riverbed is a river. The channel still cut, the water long gone. A class card that hadn't pushed a sanctioned charge in years. Washed out to the silt. He'd been watching me bleed into a floor drain with the flat attention of a man reading a chart that refuses to balance. "I've closed 300 corpses," he said, crouching, uninvited. "They quit from the top down. Pressure drops, the well runs dry, the red goes to clotted tar." He nodded at my forearm, still weeping bright and arterial honest into the grate. "You're bleeding like a live man and metering like a dead one. Wrong on both books." I let him look. Concealment had a carrying cost. A wary witness who already half knew was cheaper kept close than chased off. "You're filed deceased," he said. Not a question. Settled and claimed. He didn't recoil, didn't bolt to sell it. Washed off his own guild's rolls for a shortfall that was never his, I'd learn later, and a man knows the smell of a fellow line item written down to zero. He asked one thing only: does it hurt? I told him the truth, which was that it hurt exactly as much as ever, and simply went to a better address. He sat with that. Then he started bringing me clean water for the wounds I couldn't close, asking nothing in return. An unmonetizable kindness the ledger noted and pointedly declined to price. The first real draw I made on a Tuesday. Ren ran rental logistics 2 floors down, a soft clerk with a signet ring and a habit of clipping a finder's fee every time he posted my contract to a deadlier pit than my listing allowed. Minor treason. The kind that doesn't bleed you all at once, only steadily, a draft under a door you can never find. I'd never raised my voice about it. I'd simply held the line open. So when a training construct caught me across the spine during a sanctioned drill, 50 bored cadets watching from the rail, I ate it whole. No sound, no flinch. I let the rate find its witnesses and the routing find its waterfall. And once the senior accounts took their cut, the overflow went downstream and landed precisely where his name had been waiting. Debit, account RENN_O. Vitality bond, called in full. Rate times 1.8. 2 floors down, a soft man's collateral evaporated out of a body that had pledged it as a formality and never once read which direction it pointed. The notice posted to the public rolls the next morning, the way insolvencies always do, a single gray line in the guild bulletin, wedged between a promotion and a death. Rin O. Liquidated. Assets insufficient. Struck from active listings. No cause, no assailant. No wound an inquest could photograph, because the only weapon in the room was a bookkeeping entry on a ledger no auditor alive could read. 6 read it over my shoulder and said nothing for a long moment. Then, quiet. He won't even know who to hate. No. I folded the bulletin twice and slid it into my breast pocket, over the column where the line had already gone cold, and stood there feeling nothing the room could name. Only the small, clean settlement of a debt cleared so softly that the man who paid it would spend the rest of his ruin blaming the weather. My price climbed every time I lost. That is not how a futures market is supposed to behave. You long the survivor and short the corpse. But the exchange had never listed an asset that mailed its damage to someone else's address, and the syndicates trading my contract saw only a meat shield who drank impossible punishment and walked off the floor still green. They mistook the green for health. It was a uniform the lie wore to work. They bid me up regardless. So I volunteered for the slots that paid out to estates instead of men. Bait and suicide listings sat unfilled for sound actuarial reasons. Stand in the worm's exhale. Hold the line until the real raiders flank. Die on schedule. And I took them by the armful. Every blow I swallowed without a word didn't bleed me. It banked. Principle, compounding nightly. I wasn't climbing the rankings so much as underwriting them, converting 40 floors of borrowed malice into a position secured against the only collateral I had left, my refusal to make a sound while the flesh went. The Cinder Drake slot paid best. You stand where the heat browns the sand to glass. You hold until the flanking line lands, and your estate collects a gratuity for the trouble of burying you. I stood in it 4 times. The 4th, my eyebrows came off and stayed off. The meter never twitched. And somewhere, 2 floors down, a betrayal quietly posted the bill. Six watched my listing crawl up the board and stopped pretending he didn't understand. "You're not getting stronger," he said one evening, wringing pink water from a rag he'd given up keeping clean. "You're getting more expensive. Those aren't the same verb." "They are if you're the one being spent." He didn't argue. He'd been spent once too. Then the council posted an exhibition, and the name on the marquee was Dross. A prodigy noble, 3 years my junior and several centuries my better by his own arithmetic, Dross fought the way the well-funded always do. Beautifully, expensively, a wall of vitality bonds behind every swing so that even his recklessness came insured. The council wanted a consumable to demonstrate upon, a live prop. They slid the listing to my handler, and I signed before the ink dried, because I had read which direction his family's collateral pointed and he had not. The arena seated 9,000. Standing room took the rest. He opened with a flourish meant for the upper tiers, a bright arc that split my shoulder to the joint, and I let it. No block, no sound. He read the silence as surrender and gave the crowd their spectacle. Worked me corner to corner, a casual cruelty in 3 movements, each landing under more eyes than the last. The jeering started early. "Throw something, drift rat, bleed properly." They wanted theater, and I gave them a man losing gracefully, which is the most insulting thing a prop can do, refuse to perform the pain. Inside, the meter held its lie at full green while my arm hung wrong. The ledger did its quiet arithmetic behind my eyes, the witness premium feeding on 9,000 faces, the rate climbing with every cheer for my degradation, times 2.4, times 3.1. And the waterfall opened in order of seniority, the deepest cuts saturating the senior accounts first. Once they'd drunk their fill, the overflow went hunting downstream for whoever had profited by renting me to this floor. It found the bonds backing a prodigy who was, at that exact moment, taking his bow. Debit, estate dross. Vitality bonds, marked to market. Settlement, pending. He won the match. They handed him the laurel and the gate receipts and a roar that shook grit from the rafters, and I limped out through the loser's tunnel leaking honestly onto the boards. The scoreboard recorded what scoreboards are built to see. He had never been in less danger or more debt. The blade that gutted his house was a tally he applauded. 6 caught me in the tunnel, looked at the wound, then at my face. "Tell me you didn't enjoy that." I felt nothing the room could name. True, and the most expensive sentence I owned. The notices posted overnight, the way insolvencies always do, in gray, wedged between a betrothal and a funeral. Estate dross, vitality bonds called, collateral impaired. Heirs line suspended pending audit. Centuries of pledged vigor drained out of a column no one in that family had ever bothered to read, because the rich never read their own collateral. They assume it points away from them. By dawn, the prodigy was bankrupt and could not locate the bankruptcy. He tore through his estate's books twice, I heard, accusing clerks, demanding the saboteur, the rival house, the poisoned well, any enemy with a face he could drag to the floor and recover his vigor against. There was no face. There was only a man he'd beaten before 9,000 witnesses, walking away green, the safest and least suspicious figure in the building. The perfect alibi is the victim everyone watched you win against. He would spend a year hunting a knife that was an entry in a book. I folded that bulletin in with the others, the cold gray column thickening over my heart like a poultice that healed nothing, and stood in the drain light feeling the small, clean click of a senior debt grinding toward zero. Then a stranger sat down across from me in the dark and laid every liquidation I'd authored face up on the floor between us. Ren, dross, 2 more I'd told no living soul, and said in a voice I had used 100 times, flat as a closing statement. I've been reconciling these from the other end. Someone's running a second set of books on council blood. He tilted his head, and his face, for one impossible beat, was mine. I came to learn which of us is the forgery. The man who used to stamp liquidations for the 7 seats now poured cold barley tea into a chipped tin and slid it across the table like restitution he hadn't worked out how to price. Wren, ex-council clerk, 3rd subfloor, made redundant 18 months back and still flinching at bells that no longer rang for him. He had the posture of a lifer bent to other men's ledgers, and the tremor to match. A fine, papery shake in the left hand that chattered the tin against the wood until he caught it and stilled it under the table. 6 had dredged him up. Of course she had. A washed-out healer gathers the discarded the way a low drain gathers rain, by being the bottom of the room and patient about it. He kept copies of everything he ever filed, she said, setting a basin by my elbow. Files don't forgive. He thought you'd want to read them. I want a great many things. The shoulder dross had split, chose that moment to remind me it was still ajar, a slow heat unspooling down my ribs. Reading is cheap. Go on. She unrolled a closing rune over the wound. It found the light, drifted toward the open flesh, and slid off the way water slides off a hot iron. No bite, no knit. The glyph guttering an inch above a seam that should have swallowed it whole. She tried twice more. The wound held its mouth open and wept on, unimpressed, while behind my eyes the meter flogged its bright green nonsense at full. "You're not closing," she said, low. "I'm metering beautifully. 2 separate departments." Wren watched the rune fail and went the color of old vellum. "I can fix the rest of it," he said fast, the way frightened men volunteer. "Not the body, the record. We prove the liquidation was improper. Force a reinstatement hearing. Claw the payout back off the estate that filed your death. You walk out a wronged man instead of a dead one." He'd rehearsed it. The hope in his voice had corners. I let him keep it. Cheaper than the truth, and the truth was mine to spend, not his. They thought they were polishing a name. I was reconciling a vendetta, and the two looked identical right up until the last column. He spread the copies across the boards, manifests, write-down memos, quarterly attrition sheets, every corner bruised with a seat seal pressed in dried wax the brown of scabbed blood. He smoothed each one with the flat of his shaking hand, reverent, a man returning to the only liturgy he'd ever known. What he laid out wasn't a murder, it was a schedule. Wren walked his finger down the 3rd column of a sheet 2 years stale. There, wedged between facility maintenance and courier fees, a line ran clean through every quarter like a single stitch holding the cloth. Consumable attrition, budgeted. A target figure, a figure met again the next quarter, and the one after that, the way rent gets met, dully, on time, forever, by people who've stopped reading the amount. They write us down on a calendar, Wren said. So many consumables retired per quarter, costed in advance, the insurance penciled before the body cools. It isn't anger, it's procurement. His finger crept to the freshest sheet, to a line that had cleared 3 weeks gone, and stopped. "This one's yours." I looked at my own death, keeping company with a stationary order. Q2, filed, footnoted, forecast to the decimal. The room did its small noises, the basin dripping, the tin ticking as the tea cooled, a moth working itself stupid against the sodium lamp overhead. 6 had gone very still in the way the dead go still from the top down, pressure first. Wren kept talking because silence frightened him worse than what the paper said. "Every quarter has a signatory," he went on. "Whichever seat's rotation it is to approve the cull. They take turns. Keeps any one name off too many bodies." He fanned the sheets so the seals lined up in a row, 7 of them rotating through the calendar like a wheel I could finally see the spokes of. "Read the wax. Names get blacked, seals don't." So I read the wax, because the names were redacted to bars and the seals were not, and the seals told the cleaner story. 7 seats, passing 1 pen between them. Each quarter's harvest stamped by whoever's turn it was to hold the knife and file it under housekeeping. Spring belonged to a heron-crested seal I didn't know. Winter to the treasurer's scales, Moll. And mine, Q2, this quarter's number retired on schedule, carried a seal I'd have known blind, drunk, or 9 days dead. Vance's mark. Pressed crooked, the way he always pressed things, too eager, the wax skewed off true. Not because he hated me, because it was simply his turn at the wheel when my line came due. I had spent 9 days nursing the cheap fiction that a friend had betrayed me. An event, a wound, a thing with a face I could win against. The wax corrected me, dry as the system ever spoke. I hadn't been betrayed. I'd been budgeted.
Forecast, line-itemed, and met. One recurring expense among the courier fees, no more personal than the moth dying against the lamp. 6 found her voice first. "Then Vance isn't the one who—" "No." My own finger came to rest, not on any seal, but on the line above them all, the target figure that every quarter's pen was merely chasing, the number that set the number. Somebody writes the quota. Somebody decides how many of us retire before the books open. 7 seals signed the killing. None of them signed that. The pen rotates. The quota doesn't. 1 seat had touched no body, stamped no manifest, left no wax on any sheet in Wren's careful pile, and owed the whole running total. For 9 days the council's books had bled from a wound no clerk could locate, and the arrangement suited me fine. I posted, they paid, the ledgers stayed mannerly about the why. Then they hired someone to read the silence. She came the way an audit comes, announced by everyone else going quiet.
The rental hall I'd drawn that morning shed its small talk 3 breaths before I placed her. A woman walking the racks of leased consumables with a stylus parked behind one ear and a slate she never glanced at. Because the slate wasn't the instrument. We were. I was. A beat too long. "Sale," she said, to no one, to me. She didn't offer a hand. Auditors learn early that a handshake is a transaction, and transactions leave a record. "I'm contracted to find a discrepancy. The council's carrying a liability that doesn't reconcile. Money leaving through a door nobody built." Her gaze ran down me like a stylus down a column. "You'd be amazed how loud a quiet number gets when you stop covering your ears." My wrist tag pinged her scanner and returned the polite nothing of a closed file. A man 3 weeks dead on good paper, no balance to detain. The device chirped clearance. She read the blank, then read me reading her read it, and something at the corner of her mouth got filed for later. Empty wasn't innocence to her. Empty was a signature. The contract that day was Cinder Drake's suppression. The standard arrangement where I stand where the heat goes and the named talents stand where the credit does. The first gout took me across the chest. The bar read green while the leather cooked to my collarbone and the fat under it spat. Debit posted, routed downstream in total silence, the only currency the system honors from me. I didn't breathe wrong. Noise voids it. I'd paid that tuition in blood already. She drifted to the gallery rail, watching not the Drake, but the talent. and not the talent so much as the one piece of equipment that wasn't screaming. Second gout. I ate it whole, jaw welded shut, and across some estate I'd never see, a vitality bond ticked a notch toward red on schedule. Her head canted a few precise degrees, the way a kestrel cants before the stoop, recalculating wind.
After, in the cooling bay, she found me reseating a pauldron over meat that wouldn't close. Closing runes slid off the wound and pooled useless on the bench like spilled mercury. She watched them fail. "Pain has a sound," she said, conversational, a woman pricing produce. "You don't make it. In my experience, the only people who swallow it whole are the ones being paid by the swallow." She tapped the dead rune with one nail. "And you don't heal, you just outlast. That's not a tank. That's a man carrying something he can't put down." I gave her the flat green of a settled account. "Maybe I'm just expensive." "Everything's expensive. The question is who's invoiced." She smiled, and the smile had corners filed sharp. "My sibling went out as a line item last year. Q3. Costed in advance, insured before the body cooled." Her voice didn't crack. She'd had longer than 9 days to sand it smooth. "So I have a professional interest in doors nobody built. And a personal one."
That was the lever, and we both heard it click. Two people standing in the same ruin, pretending to circle. She wanted the pattern. I needed the principle banked deep enough that the pattern, once she found it, pointed everywhere and nowhere. A phantom too diffuse to arrest, too large to ignore. So I'd take worse. Volunteer for the slots that killed cheaper men. Feed the black ledger faster than she could reconcile it. Stay one column ahead of the only auditor sharp enough to catch me. She set the slate down. First time all day. From a sleeve, she rolled a thin silver probe between 2 fingers, the kind they use to test a corpse for residual current. "Phantom liabilities have exactly one tell," she said. "They cost something to carry, and carrying hurts. The carrier just refuses to say so." The probe caught the sodium light. "You route it through silence. I watched you do it twice. So here's my audit method, since the scanners won't help me." She stepped in close enough that I could smell ink and gun oil on her. "I'm going to hurt you, line by line on the council's coin, and the first sound you make tells me whose books bleed when you don't." She wasn't watching the wound. She was watching my mouth. The prodigy missed. Dross's signature drop, the same blade that opened my shoulder to applause 2 exhibitions back, fell a hand's width wide of the siege worm's gill seam, and 12,000 paying throats pulled breath at once. A vault door running backward, the rented spotlight sliding off his gold leaf and finding the one fixture on the sand nobody had bought a ticket to watch. I'd budgeted for the miss. You don't underwrite a prodigy's skill, you underwrite his vanity, and vanity always settles late. The tail came around like a dropped girder, basalt scute, wet tendon, a smell of hot slate and bile, and I stepped into the arc instead of out of it, arms open, chest squared, the posture of a man embracing his own foreclosure, because the witness premium has never once priced the wound. It prices the watching. 12,000 sets of eyes is a multiplier no honest desk will sell you. It took my arm at the elbow. The joint went with a sound like a ledger spine cracking, and the system time-stamped it before the pain could file its own report. Debit, dismemberment, base. Then the gallery did its work. Shame is the heaviest coin minted, and a crowd is the mint. The figure climbed as the screaming climbed. Public humiliation times 12,000 witnesses, rolling past anything a private agony had ever earned me. I did not make a sound. Silence is the routing number, and I have never once mistaken a scream for a wire transfer. Route to Vance_K Q2. His turn, his mark. The post landed clean. In some paneled office, a man who'd signed me dead for the insurance felt his own book split along a seam he couldn't locate, and the readout confirmed it in the dry arithmetic I'd come to love better than sleep. Seat liability. Critical. A number that should have closed him outright. A council chair folding in real time, while I knelt in the spotlight he'd rented and bled where everyone could itemize it. Then the ledger billed me back. It came as a second column I'd never bothered to read, unscrolling beneath the first like a subfloor underground I'd assumed was bedrock. Interest due. Every gout I'd swallowed and banked instead of settling. Every principal too diffuse to call. All of it accruing, quiet, patient, daily, against the only collateral the contract recognized. The figure was not small. It had been compounding the entire time I admired my own marksmanship, a meter running in a room I'd never thought to enter. I'd read myself as the bank. I was the loan. The stump argued with the math and lost. I went to one knee in the sand while the crowd mistook collapse for spectacle and roared the premium higher. Every cheer another notch on a debt I now understood was mine. The thing I'd called a weapon was a contract, and a contract has two faces. I had only ever studied my own. Somewhere across the table, a counterparty held the rest of the page. I felt it the way you feel a creditor in a silent room. Not a voice, a weight. The unhurried attention of something that had been adding longer than I'd drawn breath. It wanted the seat to fall. Not for me. The eagerness in the post had not been my eagerness. The routing had wanted to fly, had pulled the figure higher than I'd aimed, had spent my elbow like a clerk who'd been waiting decades to authorize a payment. The black ledger had a preference, and the preference predated me. I made myself read it the way Sale would, line by line, no flinching at the total.
The ledger was every disposed raider the guild had ever priced and posted and buried under a budgeted death. RENN_O. The Drosses I'd never met. A boy gone out as a Q3 line item, costed before his body cooled. They were not my grievance. They were the institution I'd inherited, and an institution does not lend its strength for free. It lends to collect. And it had chosen me as the instrument because I was the rare consumable who'd learned to swallow the scream. I'd thought I was using the dead to bankrupt the council. Kneeling there, one-armed, applauded, I understood the dead were using me, and they did not intend to leave a single seat standing. The bells in the surgeon's annex rang the shift change, and Wren flinched, then set her pen down level, the way you square a closed book, and looked at me across the cot like a woman who had finally found the file that explained her own redundancy.
She'd spent 3 days reading the black ledger off the overflow from my stump, copying its margins onto guild requisition forms, because old paper was the only paper her hands still trusted. "It isn't yours," she said. I'd done that arithmetic kneeling in the sand. Hearing it aloud cost nothing. "It has a date." Her thumb pinned a line I couldn't see. The ledger shows its keeper only the columns he can afford to read. "Not your contract date. Earlier. It opens the quarter the guild first booked a person as a consumable line. Reclassified a raider from headcount to inventory, salary to spoilage. 11 years back. The thing was born the hour a man became a unit you could write down." 6 set a tin cup by my good hand, water sweating on the rim. The one transaction in the room the system still refused to price. "So it's a grievance account." Wren's voice went flat, the register clerk's reserve for figures too large to feel. "Aggregate. Every disposed raider since posts to it. RENN_O, the Drosses, the boy who went out as a Q3 line item. They don't get names out there. They get a column in here. You didn't open it." She tapped the form. "You hold it.
11 years of unpaid principal, and you're only the desk it happens to sit on this season. Inventory. They'd filed people the way I file shame, by weight, by witness, by whose mark was on the page. The cruelty in it I could respect. Vance's seat had folded on humiliation alone. The next chair down, MOLL_T, Treasury, wouldn't. A treasurer is insured against shame, hedged and reinsured, a fortress of riders no crowd could breach. Only a posted death moved that account. A real one, witnessed, lethal on its face, routed through silence before the rewind could file its correction. I held 1 second of grace per death. The ledger held 11 years of appetite.
The math only balanced if I let the next blow land for true. No flinch, no step. The killing arc taken full and public with the man who'd signed me dead watching from the velvet. 3 nights later, the card put me back on sand, leased again. F-list Consumables stamped fresh and still tacky. Vance sat in the counsel box. I found his face in the rented light. I let him find mine. I smiled at him. The expression wasn't mine. It was older, the look of every name in that column glimpsing a signatory within reach. And Vance, who had worn exactly that smile the day he marked me expendable, recognized his own teeth coming back at him out of a dead man's mouth. His hand stopped halfway to his glass. The recognition arrived in installments. First the friend he'd liquidated, then the corpse that kept reappearing on his books, then the cold sum of it, that the account scanning blank under every wrist tag had been sitting 3 rows below him, learning to mail the bill. He stood.
He didn't shout. Shouting is for men who still believe there's a negotiation. He leaned to the chair beside him, said something 6 words long, and a runner peeled toward the floor with the particular speed of money deciding to stop bleeding. The slow game had a clock on it now. He'd call his debts before I could post them, buy the lethal blow himself, and pray the rewind swallowed it whole. Move on Ren and Six and the desk before the desk could close him. I counted what was left on the table. 1 arm, 1 second of grace. 11 years of dead men leaning on the pen, out of patience, and a treasurer's chair that opened to nothing softer than a corpse. 3 seats still standing, 2 of us still breathing. 1 blow left to take, and Vance already reaching for the hand that would deliver it. The blow never came.
I'd set my feet for the killing arc, banked my 1 second of grace against the impact, leaned my whole weight into the public wound I meant to take, and Vance, from the velvet, declined to spend it. He'd learned. You don't pay a debt the creditor is on his knees begging to collect. The arena lights died in a single throw. 12,000 witnesses snuffed to a black room. The one asset I'd built my whole revenge around wiped like a smudged column. No audience. No price on my shame. Smart. Then the system rewrote me. Not consumable, the leash I'd re-signed 3 nights back, ink still tacky. Something newer, posted in the red they save for verdicts. Account flagged, misappropriation of guild assets, liquidation event authorized, 7 seats concur. He'd done the arithmetic faster than I'd priced him for. Every account the ledger had quietly emptied. RENN_O struck off the rolls. Estate dross cratered overnight. Treasury lines hemorrhaging with no entry the upstairs auditors could parse. He gathered into one tidy fiction and hung it on 3 names. The phantom bleeding the books wasn't 7 seats forecasting attrition behind a single rotating pen. It was a 1-armed consumable and 2 surplus clerks, robbing the dead. Elegant, the way a tourniquet is elegant. Tie the limb off before the rot reaches the chair. Sales audit would land on a corpse already stamped thief, and the stamp would do the work of a trial. The countdown opened in the corner of my eye, clean serif, the font the system uses for everything it doesn't feel. Liquidation, 0958. Enforcers dispatched, 6. 6 had me upright before the next tick, her shoulder under my missing side, the tin cup abandoned and ringing on the concrete like a coin spun and lost.
Ren was already moving, Requisition forms crushed flat against her ribs under her shirt, choosing to die holding the original than the system's redraft of it. We came up a service shaft into the city's lower gut, a vertical dungeon of leased floors stacked 40 deep, every surface washed the wet orange of a sodium lamp over a loading dock, steam coughing from grates that fed the warrens below. Wrist tag scanners panned the crowd in slow, patient arcs. They slid over me like a draft under a door. A closed account reads as empty. For once, the architecture of my own murder paid a dividend. I walked through a checkpoint that should have killed me, and it never blinked. 6 was not so lucky. Open, current, fully named, healer licensed down to the last renewed stamp, and the scanner found her in the time it takes to sign a receipt. Split, Wren said. Not a plan, a subtraction. 3 targets the enforcers had to have their attention across, the only mercy arithmetic left us. So we scattered. Ran down toward the foundry tiers with the paper, 6 bolting east where the healer warrens might still owe her a door, me into the dark, I scanned blank inside of. The countdown bled out behind my eyes. Somewhere overhead, a runner relayed 6 words to 6 badges, and the megacity rearranged itself into a collections floor with us posted as the delinquent line. I tracked the dispatch icons drifting across my map like sharks finding the temperature of blood. 5 fanned wide. 1 didn't. It came straight for me, faster than a guess, as though it had been handed my silence and taught to read it cold. I let it close. Better to know the face on the warrant. The figure stepped out of the steam at the foundry landing, hunter's badge fresh on the collar, and lowered the hood, and I was looking at the auditor they'd hired to translate the quiet I keep. Sale. The sibling of a Q3 line item. The one person in the building who'd studied my silence long enough to invoice it. She'd read it perfectly, that was the trouble. They told me you embezzled my brother, Sale said, and racked a sealed warrant bolt into the chamber with a sound like a drawer sliding shut on a name. So talk me out of it. You've got until this finishes loading. The bolt stopped loading, not because I talked, because the answer walked in from the wrong direction. 6 stepping out of the east stairwell she'd been running down, back into the one corridor I'd survived by keeping empty. She'd heard the relay. She'd run the same subtraction Wren ran and landed on a worse sum. I was the blank the scanners couldn't bill. She was the open account they could close in the time it takes to sign for a parcel. So she put herself in the sodium light to be found, to hand the badges a balance they could settle instead of the one that read 0. Here, she called, both palms out, the healer's stamp inked fresh on the back of one wrist. I'm the one you're scanning for. He's a closed file. Sale's head turned a fraction, the auditor in her unable to ignore a self-reporting debtor, and that fraction was the whole transaction. The 4 wide enforcers folded inward on the licensed healer like collectors on a posted address. I should have run. The map said run. The cold column behind my eyes said run. Every banked second of survival I'd built said let the open account pay so the closed one keeps accruing. I didn't move fast enough. The first warrant bolt took her through the shoulder and spun her into the coolant pipe. The second pinned her hand to the rail, and the third was just bookkeeping, a badge closing a line that was already closing itself. Steam swallowed the sound. It always does down here. The foundry tiers eat screams the way they eat heat, indifferently, on a schedule. I reached her as the enforcers peeled off to chase the icons that still mattered, leaving the settled account where it fell. She was leaking dark onto orange-lit concrete, a cracked ampule rolling away on its side, the last of its saline going gray under a grate. Stupid, I said. The word came out sanded down. You were current. You were named. You were the easy collect. I know the math. Blood at the corner of her mouth, and still she found the old steadiness, the voice she'd used pouring water I never asked her to price. I just never agreed to it. I put my one hand where the worst of it was. Pointless. I'm built to absorb damage, not refund it. The architecture runs one direction. Don't, she said, when she felt me start the tally, and she could feel it. She always could, the way I reach for the ledger like a man patting his coat for a pen. Don't put me in the book. Don't make me a reason. It's how I pay them back. That's why. Her fingers closed on my wrist, weak, certain. You don't owe me. I gave it. There's nothing to collect. Then, smaller, the last of it spent on the one balance I'd never let her settle. It wasn't a debt, Kai. I forgive you the whole thing. I felt the ledger reach for her death the way it reaches for everything. Reflexive, hungry, the column already unscrolling to receive a fresh red figure. It stopped. Entry attempted. Party 6. Injury, terminal. Searching for debtor, none named. Searching for grievance, none posted. Loyalty is not a priceable instrument. No debit, no interest. Cannot monetize. The book wants grievance. That's the only coin it mints, the only wound it will lend against, the only blood it knows how to compound. She died of the opposite, and the opposite doesn't trade. 11 years of other people's murders I can weaponize. Vance's seat I can drive past liability into collapse. The dead I carry are an armory because every one of them was robbed, and the robbery is the round in the chamber. 6 wasn't robbed. She gave.
Freely, off the books, into a hand built only to take. I knelt in the sodium wash with a settlement statement that balanced to 0 and a cooling weight against the stump where my arm used to be, and understood the single entry I'll never get to mail. No bill for this. No seat to route it to. No interest accruing in anyone's name but the one I answered to in the dark. Every grief I'd ever owned, I'd turned into a weapon. This one I'd just have to carry. Wren found me before the enforcers circled back, and that single fact flipped the night's arithmetic. The blank account they couldn't bill was suddenly the only ledger in the foundry worth reading, and she'd run the wrong way down 3 tiers to put it in my hand. She knelt in the coolant runoff without flinching at 6. The tin tremor in her left hand chattered against a service ladder until she pressed the rung flat and stilled it. Then she unfolded the paper. Not manifests this time.
One sheet photographed off a vault binder, 7 seal marks bruised into the margin like teeth pressed into a wax apple. It isn't Vance, she said. I waited. The book behind my eyes idled, that low hunger it keeps for a name to debit. It was never one signature. Her finger walked the columns the way mine walks a wound. The quota's a product, Kai. Structured. 7 seats underwrite the consumable attrition, bundle it, and sell the death forward as a hedge. They short their own people. You weren't betrayed by a friend. You were scheduled by a committee. I read it. The cold column read it faster than I could, and posted the summary before my eyes finished the line. Consumable futures, tranche F. 7 countersignatories. Expected loss, budgeted. Recovery on default, insured. Vance hadn't liquidated me. Vance had inked a line a boardroom drafted 11 years before he ever sat the seat. Every face I'd filed as the wound turned out to be a teller at the window of a much older bank, counting out my death in installments and calling it prudence. Sale came down the east stairwell with her bolt rig slung and the chamber empty. I set my feet for the arc. No flinch, the lethal line taken full and public, because a posted death routed through the auditor would close a balance no humiliation could.
old reflex. The dead man's smile started up my face on its own. She didn't raise the rig. She looked at 6 a long, level moment, then at the 7 seals in Ren's hand, and her jaw reconciled to a figure she'd been carrying longer than I'd carried mine.
Q3, she said. Last year. They told my brother it was a contested raid. The report read like a maturity date.
The auditor they'd hired to read my silence had been reading her own the entire shift. She crouched, turned the sheet under the sodium glare, and found the tranche where her brother had been priced.
Her thumb left a wet print on his row. Coolant or the other thing. I didn't ask. And the ledger, mercifully, didn't quote me a rate on it.
I was sent to find the leak, she said. I found the plumbing.
When her shoulder settled against mine in the orange wash, neither of us logged it. Some entries you just let stand. The book that had refused 6 woke for this. It unscrolled the whole 11 years at once, every red figure I'd been compounding, every name, every interest accrual ticking against my own marrow, and at the foot of it, beneath the debits and beneath the interest due column that had been eating me alive since I lost the arm, it posted a line it had never once shown me. Settlement in full, available. Method: single catastrophic injury sustained by instrument. Routing: simultaneous, all 7 countersignatories. Effect: tranche F called. Every seat bankrupt on delivery. Advisory: instrument not expected to survive delivery. I read it twice.
The math held both times. The architecture had run one direction since the floor of the Sunken Arena, and here, finally, was the terminal it had been building toward. One wound. Taken whole, no rewind spent, no flinch, no step. Build to all 7 seats at the exact speed of my own bleeding out, the loan calling itself due in a single, voided breath. A balloon payment that empties every account in the building at once, and almost certainly the body holding the pen. Ren's tremors started again, and she let it. Sale's hand found my stump where 6's weight still cooled against it. I'd spent the whole descent thinking the dead were my armory, my collateral, my round in the chamber, and the line at the foot of the page corrected the entry in red. They hadn't made me a creditor at all. They'd been assembling, patiently, 11 years deep, a single delivery the system had only ever recognized by its truer name. A detonation with a due date. The witnesses had always been the murder weapon.
12,000 pairs of eyes on the Sunken Arena sand, each one a markup, each indrawn breath a tick on the premium that made my dying worth more to the seats than my living had ever billed. And Vance had understood that arithmetic to the decimal when he killed the lights to keep the loss off the gallery's books. Erase the audience, erase the price. I'd read that as theft the whole way down. I read it now as a tell. A man only smothers the lamps over a figure he can't afford to have witnessed. So I would buy the figure back, retail, citywide. "You're not coming," I said, and watched the sentence land wrong on both faces at the same instant. Ren's tremor came up off the service rung, tin against iron, that small chatter she lets run when she's about to argue with paper she's already lost to. "Alone is how they price you," she said. "Alone is the discount. Alone is the only signature the vault will admit." I tapped the 7 seal marks bruised into her sheet. "This right seats 7.
It does not seat 7 plus an honor guard. I walk in as what they filed me, a closed account, scanner blank, a consumable returned for recycling. The door reads 0 and opens. You two read as people. The door reads people and calls enforcers. Sale's jaw did the reconciling thing again, working a number she didn't like toward a total she couldn't dispute. "Then what's our line item?" I told them.
The lava vault is the deepest tier the council keeps, a basalt drum sunk over a molten core the guild calls reclamation and the rest of us call the furnace, where spent consumables ride a conveyor of brass tally tokens into the skimmer and come out as slag credited back to the house. Once a year, the 7 convene above it to call their tranches due, to read the attrition aloud, to drop the year's bad debt into the orange and watch the ledger balance in real time. A liquidation right. They hold it in the dark on purpose. No premium, no witness, no shame price. A death that costs the killers nothing because nobody is invoiced for the wince. Vance taught me the mechanic the hard way, I said. I'm going to teach it back to the whole committee at once. You're not my muscle. You're my broadcast. Wren stopped trembling. That's how I knew she'd done the math ahead of me. Every rig in this complex feeds the spectator relay, I went on. Sales risk keyed to the arena uplink. Q3 enforcement carried that access and never thought to revoke a dead man's sister. Wren has 11 years of seal-stamped manifests to caption it with. You take the relay room on the mezzanine. You splice the vault's own surveillance into the public feed, and you push it to every plaza screen and wrist tag ticker in the city before the first token drops. They'll cut it, Sale said. They'll try. Cutting it spikes the premium higher than leaving it. A blackout mid-right reads as concealment, and concealment is the one thing a witnessed market punishes worse than the crime. I almost smiled and didn't waste it. The more eyes on the floor when the wound posts, the larger the shame price the system attaches, and the settlement routes to the seats at that inflated rate. They built a hedge that pays out cheapest in the dark. I'm going to make it mature under 100,000 witnesses at noon. The book behind my eyes idled, then offered a courtesy I'd never asked for. Witness premium, variable. Current gallery, 0. Projected at broadcast, unbounded. Advisory, settlement value scales with observed loss. Unbounded. The one word in the whole instrument that had ever worked in my favor. Wren folded her sheet into her coat with the care of a woman closing a casket she'd built herself. If the feed holds, she said, they can't reclassify it after. A witness death isn't a misappropriation, it's a public default. It's an audit, I said, performed live, by the asset. Sale caught my stump where 6's weight had finally gone cold and let go of it, which was its own kind of countersignature. She didn't say, be careful. She'd priced that sentiment honestly and found it worthless. Push the wound late, she said instead. Give me 90 seconds to seat the relay. Don't let it call due on an empty room. An empty room is the only thing it won't do. I turned for the maintenance shaft, the heat already coming up it like a creditor's handshake, dry, total, expecting payment. 90 seconds, then make me expensive. They went up, I went down. The shaft narrowed and warmed, the rail growing tacky under my palm, sulfur thick enough to taste as a tin coin laid on the tongue. Each rung dropped the temperature reading on my HUD into a color I'd last seen on a foreclosure notice held to a flame. The core's glow found the bottom door before I did, a seam of orange under a slab of fitted basalt, pulsing on the slow conveyor's rhythm, tokens clicking somewhere beyond it like a teller counting into a drawer. I set my hand flat to the slab. It read me, 0. Closed account returned for reclamation. The vault opened. 7 chairs ringed the molten throat, and 7 faces turned toward me, and not one of them was surprised, because at the head of the ring sat an 8th chair I'd never counted, its back already branded with a name burned black into the grain. Mine. The chair at the head was an invitation to sit down and be subtracted, pre-printed with my name the way a foreclosure stamps the deed before the gavel ever falls. And I read the terms, and I declined them standing. They'd built me a throne to die in. I'd already died in a cheaper one. "Sit," said the woman at Vance's left. Mall, ledger thin, a stylus tucked behind her ear like she meant to initial my corpse. "You're early to your own reclamation. I'm punctual to yours." The heat off the molten throat dried my eyes to grit. I let them water and didn't blink the count away. A rung clanged somewhere up the shaft. Sale, seating the relay. 90 seconds I had to spend without spending myself. So I spent theirs instead. The right reads the attrition aloud before the tokens drop. House custom. I'd hate to deprive the committee of procedure. There's no gallery. Ren, a big man whose vitality bond glowed at his collar like a pilot light. "Read it to who?" The book stirred behind my eyes, and I let the figure bleed where they could watch it climb in the orange skin of the floor. Witness premium, engaged. Gallery, 41,000, climbing. "To them," I said. 41,000 eyes found the camera bolted in the vault's throat the same instant the 7 did. A vitality bond is a coward's organ. 7 of them dimmed at once. "Name it." I turned my one hand palm up, an auditor inviting disclosure.
Each of you. What you bought, who you shorted, which dead name paid the spread. The instrument scales with observed loss, so observe, out loud. Maul laughed, the brittle kind, already pricing the silence after it. I authorized a tranche, paper. I never laid a finger on a raider. Confession logged, authorized. Premium times 2.3. The paper had names. 6 was page 9. I didn't raise my voice. The throat did that for me. She forgave the whole ledger on her way down. You should hear what that does to a multiplier. Ren went the other way, chin up, betting the dark still owed him a wholesale rate. I signed nothing. You can't read a seat off a dead man's hallucination. Concealment flagged. Witnessed market penalty. Premium times 3.1. Lying on a live feed costs more than the truth. I did warn you. Almost kind. You never listen to the consumables. That's the whole business model.
One by one I walked them down the ring, and one by one the multiplier fattened. A confession spiked it on admitted loss. A denial spiked it harder on concealment. And there was no third door, because I'd nailed the third door shut 11 years before any of them learned my face. The dross proxy chose silence. Silence audits as the deepest concealment of all. Then Vance leaned into the light, the brace creaking at his ribs, 2 working bones doing the labor of 12, marrow that still remembered a heat his skin had never met. Kai. Just the name, the way he'd said it across 100 floors when he wanted the tank to hold 1 more second. Set a number. Anything the book wants. I'll wire it from the senior tranche before the conveyor turns. You walk out solvent. We file it as a write-up and nobody else burns. For a second I considered it, because pretending to consider it cost nothing and bought sale 5 more. Then I showed him the line no creditor can paper over. Grievance instrument, non-transable, not redeemable by debtor, settlement in injury only. You can't buy it back. You taught me why. The throat laid its dry handshake on my remaining palm, total, expecting payment. A death in the dark costs the killer nothing, so the book quit pricing in coin years ago. It only clears in the currency you minted. Loss, witnessed, and mine last of all. The figure resolved, and it was finally large enough to make the word I'd loved mean something on delivery. Every vitality bond in the ring rated for vaporization. 7 pilot lights snuffed in a single posting. The tranche bankrupt clean to the marrow. Settlement ready. Routing seats 1 to 7. Instrument, 1 catastrophic injury. There was a footnote. There's always a footnote. Debit must originate with holder. Balance clears on holder's fatal event. I read the catch and didn't argue it. 6 had already taught me the shape of a death that pays for someone else and posts none named, and I was done being slower than the people willing to die in my place. I walked to the edge. The conveyor clicked its brass teeth past my heel, counting me toward the skimmer like any other spent token. 41,000 had become 200,000. The number behind my eyes ran out of digits I cared to read. Vance came up out of his chair, brace and all, saying my name like a man who'd just found the fine print written in his own hand. I smiled the corpse's smile, the one that costs nothing, the one somebody else always gets invoiced for. I stepped off. The heat took my skin on the way down and peeled it like a receipt off a hot till, and my HP held at full, the damage time-stamping, routing elsewhere, the way it always had. The book posted one line into the falling. Fatal event, denied. Account closed. No holder to debit. I jumped to die. The book wouldn't let me. Denied posted across the falling, in the same flat hand it uses for everything. My skin already lifting away up the shaft, the catch I'd misjudged unfolding its real teeth. Debit must originate with holder, which it had. My heels leaving the brass, my body the source entry, the way every clean line begins. Balance clears on holder's fatal event. And there the ledger stalled, because a closed account keeps no death in reserve. The blank that walked me through the wrist tag checkpoint paid out one final dividend. The dead don't die on request. They just keep going down. So the catastrophic injury, minted, witnessed, refused a home in me, went looking down its routing list. It found 7 names already typed. The heat reached my marrow, and the marrow forwarded it. Every degree time-stamped and debited and mailed up the throat to the senior tranche where the deepest cut always lands first. My HP held it full. Somebody else's didn't. Settlement posting. Observed loss, 214,000 and climbing. Witness premium, peak. Instrument, 1 catastrophic injury. Routed 1 to 7. Above me, the ring lit up the way a switchboard does the instant every line shorts at once. Vance's vitality bond went first. Senior creditor, front of the waterfall. 2 working ribs bracing against a debit that had no opinion on bones. Moll next, whose authorized had only ever meant she signed where the dying couldn't reach the pen. Wren after her, still composing a denial his throat would never finish billing. The dross proxy, who'd bought silence at wholesale and got charged for it at the witnessed rate. 4 pilot lights gone in the time it takes 1 brass token to clear a single tooth of the conveyor. Largest debit posted to this instrument. No prior entry compares. The book didn't gloat. I did that for it, and even that I kept under budget. Seats 5 and 6 tried the last move cornered creditors have. They reached for the senior tranche to wire the balance clear, the very paper Vance had slid across to me, and found the tranche liquidating beneath their own weight, a vault dissolving its own floor. You cannot sell a future short while the future watches you do it. 200,000 witnesses had repriced the instrument in real time, and the market they'd built to trade our deaths handed back its own corrected number. Consumable futures, tranche F, mark to market, value 0. Positions liquidated, counterparties none solvent. 7 seats had underwritten our attrition and sold it forward. 7 seats settled in the only currency a grievance instrument clears in: loss. Witnessed. Theirs at last. The corporation that traded human beings died the cleanest death in the room, on its own balance sheet, in front of everyone, executed entirely by the contract logic it had drafted to bury us.
The conveyor's brass teeth caught my coat. The skimmer, the dumb machine that rakes spent tokens off the molten skin so the throat doesn't choke on its own dead, read me as exactly that: a closed line with no death to post and no debit to seize. It lifted me out of the heat the way it lifted every other thing the vault was finished with, and set me down at the head of the ring, in the one chair I'd refused to look at on the way in. The 8th seat, branded black. My name burned into the spine of it 11 years before I'd learned to read the rest of the book. 7 thrones of cooling ash around a head chair holding the last solvent name in the tranche. Mine. The consumable they'd priced into the spread, the F-list line they'd shorted, the only account on the floor the market couldn't touch because it had closed itself first and left them nothing to repossess. I sat. Not for the throne of it, my legs were a separate negotiation, but because the chair was there, the throat still breathed warm against my ruined sleeve, and the feed was still running its red tally past 200,000 strangers, who now knew exactly what their raiders had been worth as paper. The book posted its last line of the night, and it was the entry I'd been falling toward without the nerve to name. Fatal event, permanently denied. Holder, null. Instrument held in perpetuity. No further debtors, no release. I read it twice. 6 had taught me the shape of it already, down on the warrant floor, a death freely given that pays for someone else and posts none named, no grievance, a balance the ledger cannot bill in either direction. I'd stepped off to file myself in her column. The book declined the entry the way it had declined to monetize her, for the same reason and to the same dead end. There was no one left to owe me. There was no death I was permitted to spend. The grief I could never invoice had a roommate now, the death I would never get to pay, and the two of them lodged in the only name no seat could reach, the one I answer to when the lights go out. Solvent and witnessed and alone at the head of a table of ash, the largest debit the book had ever cleared had zeroed every account but the one that mattered, and the verdict came in dry and total. I had won the whole ledger outright, and it had sentenced me to hold it, unredeemed, unreleased, with no remaining buyer for the only thing I'd ever wanted to sell, which was the right to stop being the one left standing. The chair betrayed me before the 7 ever managed it. Whoever branded my name into the 8th seat 11 years ago had bolted it over the throat itself, the one throne in the ring mounted across the open molten mouth, a private joke about where the holder of the book belonged. And now the brass spine split along the K in a sound like a vault door changing its mind. The ash thrones held their dead. Mine did not. I went into the heat the way every spent token went, raked off the world's skin and dropped toward the throat that had no opinion on whether I'd earned the chair. The fall was short. The math was shorter. Here the book hit a line it could not close. A holder it had sworn to keep posted permanently denied, falling into the exact burn it had just refused to let me spend on 6's empty column. Holder proximity, terminal. Fatal event, imminent. Conflict, holder null. Instrument requires collector. Grievance is not a thing that services itself. An account this size needs a body to keep the cursor warm, and the book had bankrupted every body in the room but mine. So it did the only thing a ledger does when 2 true numbers refuse to reconcile. It found the entry it ran on the arena floor. 1 second, 11 years deep. The correction it had been quietly hiding in its margins since before I could read it, and it ran the line again. Time posted an adjustment. The heat untouched me. The lick of fire crawling up my ruined sleeve crawled back into the throat and shut its mouth. The fall reversed a heartbeat. The brass spine unsplit.
The world inhaled the second it had already exhaled and handed it back unspent. I have died on a clock before and watched it refuse the timestamp. This was that, run backward through a furnace, a hand I couldn't see reaching across the threshold to drag me off the road one breath before the wheels. Two hands I could see finished the job. Sale had her brother's Q3 grip locked around my forearm, the dead arm's empty cuff fisted in her other hand for ballast, and Wren, manifest ink still smearing her knuckles from the relay splice, hauled my collar like she was reclaiming inventory the vault had no paper to keep. They dragged me off the lip onto cold iron. I tasted copper, char, and for once, nothing owed. The book caught up to itself and read the room. Settlement complete. Tranche F dissolved. Debtors none. Creditors none. Holder balance 0. Then the line my whole closed life had been waiting 11 years to invert. Account open. Not closed to hide the body. Not flagged, not liquidated, not leased back to a guild that priced my deaths forward and shorted its own rater. Open. Solvent. The scanner blank that had walked through a checkpoint built to kill it now carried no balance for any seat to seize, because the seats were ash and the spread was 0, and the only name still solvent on the floor had finally been allowed to mean a man instead of a futures contract. I lay on the iron and breathed like it was a transaction I was getting away with. There was still the one entry I'd never get to spend. 6's column sat where it always would. None named, no grievance, cannot monetize. A balance the book could not bill in either direction, and I could not set down. I'd tried to file myself beneath it and been declined.
So I did the only thing left that wasn't accounting. I carried it. Not as debt, because the book wouldn't have it as debt, as the water she used to set by my good hand, the one transaction in any room the system never got to touch. Wren put a flask in that hand now without being asked. The same hand, the same side. I drank. I let it post to no ledger at all. "You're lighter," Sale said, meaning the math, meaning me. "I'm unowned," I said, and heard how the word landed in the quiet. Not victory, not a throne, just a dead man on cold iron who'd balanced the books and discovered the far side of that was a country with no flag, no guild, no seat, no leash, and no one left to tell him what his marrow was worth by the gram. Sale didn't let go of the cuff. Wren didn't file me back into stock. 3 names with no house over them and no spread under them, kneeling on the warm iron of a vault that had run out of reasons to want us dead. The only ledger in the building no seat had drafted, and the only one I'd ever signed twice. That should have been the last line. The book disagreed. It always does. The cursor that had blinked behind my eyes for 11 years did not power down with the tranche it had just buried. It sat there in the dark of me, patient as a meter, open as the account it had finally let me hold without a buyer. And 3 floors up, in a tower this rotten never short on creditors, a seat I'd never heard of signed something it shouldn't have. And far below the molten throat, quiet as interest, a fresh line began to accrue.